Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our next virtual event with Raven Leilani and Glory Edim here to discuss Raven's acclaimed debut novel, Luster. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring our works, bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time. I heard that go. And we're so excited also to reach outside of LA. So thank you all for joining us from wherever you are. And we'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, which you can learn about by signing up for our email newsletter on our website, as well as following us on social media and following us here on Crowdcast. You'll get direct notifications when we go live. So that's also handy. Our next event is scheduled for this Thursday at 6 p.m. with Professor W.J.T. Mitchell and Bill Ayers to discuss W.J.T.'s book, Mental Traveler, A Father, a Son, and a Journey Through Schizophrenia. Today's virtual event will end with a Q&A, and to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. It's right next to the chat to the left. And if you see a question that you'd like for the speakers to answer, you can bump them up in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Yay, there it is. And please consider, speaking of, that's perfect timing, please consider supporting our bookstore and our authors by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, which you can do by clicking the green button below. It'll redirect you to our website, but it won't interrupt the viewing. So that is a nice little plus there. And we're also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo. I actually already inputted the link in the chat at the top to the audiobook version. So there you are. And with all that said, let me introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Raven Leilani's work has been published in Granta, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunction with The Cut, and New England Review, among other publications. Leilani received her MFA from NYU and was an Axon Foundation writer in residence. Luster is her first novel. Glory Edim is an author, activist, and the founder of Well Read Black Girl, a nationwide book club turned literary festival that celebrates the uniqueness of Black literature and sisterhood. Well Read Black Girl's mission is to use literature and storytelling as a tool for advocacy and collective empowerment. The annual literary festival aims to transform the publishing industry by increasing the public visibility of Black women and non-binary authors. Glory has won numerous awards for her work supporting and sustaining literature, including the 2017 Innovators Award from the Los Angeles Times Book Prizes and the Madam C.J. Walker Award from the Hurston Wright Foundation. She also serves on the board of New York City's Housing Works bookstore. Her best-selling anthology, Well Read Black Girl, Finding Our Stories, Discovering Ourselves, was published by, which I will share a link to also, was published by Penguin Random House in 2018. She is currently working on a memoir that explores her intimate relationship with reading and Nigerian American heritage, which is so exciting. And she is proud alumni of Howard University and currently resides in Los Angeles. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to these amazing women, Raven and Glory. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. And thank you both for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is really cool. Like, I just want to say how amazing this is to do. Like, Glory, this is incredible. And thank you, BookSoup, for hosting us. This is just amazing.
I want to echo Raven and say thank you, BookSoup. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is really exciting. And I mean, Luster has been the book of the summer. And I'm just so ready to dive into questions. But before we do that, I know, Raven, you're going to read a little bit for us first and get us kind of in the mood. You want to kick it off?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to start from the beginning. It's just what I've been doing because you don't need to preface it. And thank you, everyone who came. I see there's so many of you. That is wild. All right, I'm going to start. The first time we have sex, we are both fully clothed at our desk during working hours, bathed in blue computer light. He is uptown processing a new bundle of microfiche, and I am downtown handling corrections for new laboratory detective manuscript. He tells me to take off my underwear in my cubicle. His messages come with impeccable punctuation. He is fond of words like taste and spread. The empty text field is full of possibilities. Of course, I worry about IT remoting into my computer, or my internet history warranting yet another discipline meeting with HR, but the risk. The thrill of a third pair of unseen eyes. The idea that someone in the office with that sweet, post-lunch break optimism, might come across this thread and see how tenderly Eric and I have built this private world. In his first message, he points out a few typos in my online profile and tells me he has an open marriage. His profile pictures are candid and loose. A grainy photo of him asleep in the sand, a photo of him shaving, taken from behind. It is this last photo that moves me, the dirty tile and soft procession of steam, his face in the mirror, stern with quiet scrutiny. I saved the photo to my phone so I can look at it on the train. Women look over my shoulder and smile, and I let them believe he is mine. Otherwise, I have not had much success with men. This is not a statement of self-pity. This is just a statement of the facts. Here's a fact. I have great breasts, which have warped my spine. More facts. My salary is very low. I have trouble making friends, and men lose interest in me when I talk. It always goes well initially, but then I talk too explicitly about my ovarian torsion or my rent. Eric is different. 2 weeks into our correspondence, he told me about the cancer that ravaged half his maternal family. He tells me about an aunt he loved who made potions with fox hair and hemp, how she was buried with a corn husk doll she made of herself. Still, he describes his childhood home lovingly, the digressions of farmland between Milwaukee and Appleton, the yellow-breasted chats and tundra swans that would appear in his yard looking for seed. When I talk about my childhood, I only talk about the happy parts. The tape of Spice World I received for my 5th birthday, the Barbie I melted in the microwave when no one was home. Of course, the context of my childhood, the boy band, the Lunchables, the impeachment of Bill Clinton, only emphasizes our generational gap. Eric is sensitive about his age and about mine, and he makes a considerable effort to manage a 23-year discrepancy. He follows me on Instagram and leaves lengthy comments on my posts, retired internet slang interspersed with earnest remarks about how the light falls on my face. Compared to the inscrutable advances of younger men, it is a relief. We talk for a month before our schedules align. We try to meet earlier, but things always come up. This is just one way his life is different from mine. There are people who count on him, and sometimes they need him urgently. Between his abrupt cancellations, I realize that I need him too, in a way that makes my dreams delirious expressions of thirst, long stretches of yellow desert, cathedrals hemmed in dripping moss. By the time we set our first real date, I would have done anything. He wanted to go to Six Flags. We decide to go on a Tuesday. When he rolls up in his white Volvo, I've only made it to the part of my pre-date routine where I try to find the most appropriate laugh. I put on 3 dresses before I find the right one. I tie up my braids and line my eyes. There were dishes in the sink and a pervasive salmon smell in the apartment, and I don't want him to think it has anything to do with me. I put on a complex pair of underwear that is not so much underwear as a bundle of string, and I stand before the mirror. I think to myself, you are a desirable woman. You are not a dozen gerbils in a skin casing. Outside, he is double parked. He leans against the car and remains like this as I come out, his eyes bright and still. His hair is darker than I expected. A black so opaque it looks blue. His face is almost obscenely symmetrical, though one of his eyebrows is higher than the other, and it makes his smile seem a little smug. It is the second day of summer, and all the city's powers have no sway over him. I reach for his hand, trying not to swallow my tongue, and something feels strange. Of course there are nerves. In person, he's a total daddy, his face alert and hard, softened only by the slight recession of his hair. But this strange feeling has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with me looking past his sensuous mouth and slightly askew nose for any indication that he is as nervous as I am. It is that it is 8:15 a.m., and I feel happy. I'm not on the L, smelling someone's lukewarm pickles, wishing I were dead. So I'll stop there.
So that beginning is so amazing and like pulls you right in so you understand who Edie is, that she's dealing with all these things happening in her head, whether it's trying to put on the right dress
Yes.
or, you know, go through her computer. And it's like this. When I read the first sentence, I was like, oh, okay, we are here. We are doing this. We are all the way in. But each sentence in this book does that. It like pulls you in a way where you're either going to be engrossed and like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Or it might make you feel uncomfortable and
Yes.
you pull back and cringe. There are so many moments where I cringed at her behavior. But in a way, yeah, it was good because I remembered all the things I did when I was 24. I'm no longer 24, but I could really understand her decisions, and even when I didn't, I could also empathize with them. And
Yeah.
I think I want to start with her, Edie, being such a complex just well-developed character. How did you, begin with her? Like, how did you know that this girl who is searching for identity and messy and complicated and an artist, how did you start develop writing this character?
So, I mean, like you mentioned, I wanted to start right away. I will say just more on the kind of craft level, it was really important to me. I wrote this with the intent for it to be read. And so I really kind of wanted to get in there and give whoever was opening the book a reason to stay. So there's that. But when I first started writing, I knew I wanted, and messy was the word you just used too. I knew I wanted, in depicting a Black woman, seeking intimacy, seeking her artistry, I wanted to depict it in a way that felt honest and that made room for a moral ambiguity, that made room for contradiction, because I think contradiction is human. And in this case, we're starting out and she's on this date with Eric, and she's kind of putting herself together. Like, the first time you see her is in this moment of enormous consideration of how to present herself. And like through the book, you follow her through these different environments, some of them romantic, some of them professional, and she's doing that. She's in the situation, but also kind of hovering above the situation, trying to figure out the most palatable way to present herself, kind of curating herself rather than being totally present. So that is part of it, kind of that real anxious, meticulous performance, but also you get underneath that, because it's an honest first person, you get her most candid private thoughts, which was, I think, the most important thing for me, that we get to see the friction between that like external performance and like the private dark mind, which is full of rage and full of want.
I love that. I love that, the fact that you say this like private internal conversation, because a lot of times we aren't privy to the internal dialogue that is happening in the lives of Black women. And there is this idea of perfectionism, respectability politics, so much positioning of the Black body. And you like pull all that to the side and make it very clear this person is human and full of error, but she's still deserving of love. And I think that's another part that you make very clear in each chapter. And there were so many moments where I was like, you are so good with sentences and one-liners. And I was telling a friend, I was trying to describe it in the best way. But I was also, we were texting, so I was trying to summarize it. And I was like, it feels like I'm reading Twitter, like I felt like I was reading Edie's tweets, at the same time.
In some ways you are like, I mean, there are the actual tweets that she posts that no one likes, right? Right. But I think that's right, because there's kind of like, dare I talk about Twitter, but Twitter is like kind of this like stream of consciousness ooze, like that is
but it's so performative at the same time.
It's like that's right.
Consciousness that you're projecting of like the ways you want people to like view or
that's
take you in,
That's right. And she's doing that like in kind of many different rooms with many different people, so you get to see her be diffracted in that way. And because she's an artist, it begs a question of whether you can create from that kind of distortion. But no, it was important for me to write a Black woman who is full of error, and like you said, like the kind of impossible standards, of performance and respectability. It is, and it shouldn't be, right? But like, it is weirdly a radical thing to allow error for a Black woman who is allowed a kind of razor thin margin for error. And she's up against that, especially in her kind of professional spheres. But yeah, you're right. Like I think we kind of follow her and watch her kind of like look through whichever mask is most appropriate. And in some cases, the mask can like lower a little bit. But before she does that, it's she's studying. She's kind of calculating, is this a person that I can, you know, show my true face to?
Yeah, and I love I love the fact as a character, she is an artist, and you show her failures, you show her frustrations, and there's this moment where, without giving away too many spoilers, where she throws a painting in the trash.
Yes.
And that also felt like a metaphor of like, of her failing. And why was it important for you as, because I think there's so many thoughts going in my head, but the first thing I want to say, I think as an artist or a writer, there's so many revisions and mess ups and
Yes.
things, all the behind the scenes stuff people do not see, and
Yes.
you were kind of putting that on display in that moment. Why was it important for you to show her like physically throwing this painting away after she was like putting all her heart and soul into that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that part, that's important for me because I think, well, I mean, first is, our painting was my first love. And so it was the very first thing I really grappled with and felt extreme self-doubt around. But I also, in writing about any kind of artistic process, and I feel it more now when I write, is that failure is like 89% of it, probably more.
Right.
And I wanted to make room to talk about the way that kind of, I don't know, the detours that you encounter along that trajectory, because I think there are many, and they're strange.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, one, to talk about, with Edie, she's a Black woman trying to lay claim to art. So there are impediments to her access to that art that she has no control over, that are structural, but there are also, self-imposed impediments.
Right.
And I wanted to speak to that, the kind of the way art is an act of faith, like I did want to talk about the way that, her kind of precarity contributes to her ability, not to create, her exhaustion in dealing with everything that she's dealing with. But the part of this book that I really, I mean, there are many parts that I really cared about, was trying to depict an artist's journey in a way that I hoped would be liberating, in that it made room for a journey that encapsulates detours, that involves failure and involves having to grapple with that failure and kind of propel yourself forward, even when the work is private and unseen.
How do you think, because as you mentioned, you're a painter and an artist as well in so many different forms and mediums. What do you bring from each discipline? And as I say that, I'm just to the audience, I'm going to be taking your questions too. So I will be looking in the chat. Please add in questions for Raven, and we'll be going back and forth.
So I think, because I started with painting, and it was the first thing I think I ever put aside, speaking of like throwing paintings in the trash, I really, it was the first one I came up against, and I kind of realized this is something that I need to do more privately, something where the love is more intact when it is not, like when it's something I can kind of approach when I, less like writing, when it's hard, I still find a way through it, but I came up with an enormous love of visual art, specifically painting, and like specifically portraiture and like anatomy. And I think that preoccupation too is on the page, that my, obsession with bodies and what they do and like their kind of private drama. But I also just, I don't know, it's a medium that I really admire. I admire the people who can do it well, because I think the human form especially is a thing that we are all an expert in. And so to be able to depict it, well, it feels like a Herculean task a little bit, but it also is, it provided me the opportunity to write about, what it looks like to grapple with your craft, and what it means to doubt yourself, and what it means to kind of work through that doubt.
I love that. I love the fact that you're so candid and honest about your experience, and the parts of your lived experience that kind of creep into the story of Edie as well, and it just feels very genuine, and you can feel that reverence in the book too. It just like feels like you, again, this idea of respecting the character despite their flaws.
Yes.
And so I'm going to jump from that into sex because there's so much great sex in the book, and I absolutely love like contemporary fiction and historical fiction, and I will be honest, there are not a lot of good sex scenes. At least I haven't read any. If you guys want to drop that in the comments, if you want to leave me some suggestions, but you have a great way of describing intimate details.
Thank you.
It's so good. And I'm curious when it comes to craft, like how do you write a literary sex scene without it, because it feels genuine and not like cheesy, you know?
You know, like, and you know, it's funny, and like cheesy kind of sex has its place. You know, sometimes that's what you exactly what you want. You know, for this case, you know, I really, I think I kind of wrote it the only way I could think of, and that is, you know, when I see like sex on the screen or I see sex on the page, what kind of draws me to a good sex scene is, and this is a creepy thing to say, but like, is the sense that I'm like a voyeur, you know, like I feel like there is something really magnetic. Oh my gosh. So I actually, so Edward Hopper is one of my favorite painters, and I was reading a profile on him. I promise this has a point. And you know, the thing they always say about his paintings is that, you know, he's like a master of depicting solitude, and so you as the viewer kind of like, I don't know, you're kind of put in the position of looking into a thing that feels kind of private and solitary. And someone wrote a profile on him. I'm keeping myself from not remembering who, but they were talking about the magnetism of that feeling of voyeurism, right? Of looking at something that is not aware that it's being observed and knowing that you cannot enter it. And there is like, in depicting sex, you know, I really wanted my reader to feel that, you know, because within voyeurism, good. I'm glad. You know, I wanted, you know, because voyeurism is predicated on a private thing being observed, you know, meaning it is not studied and not curated, especially in a book like this where so much space is kind of about that curation. Like I wanted to depict that on the page. So I think that's part of what, and like, that's not necessarily a pleasant feeling. It's like a squirmy, uncomfortable feeling. And that felt true to me, to depict sex in a way that felt, you know, uncomfortable, that felt candid and made space.
That's how sex feels at 24. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's so like, experimental, and you're like getting to know your body, and you're figuring yourself out. Like your 20s are so about experimenting and being open, you know.
That's right.
But you know, like, you know, you feel that Edie trying to figure that out, and then almost at moments there's a sadness too, because as you know, as a reflecting back on your 20s, when the times you make poor decisions, or the thing, or you can, how do I want to explain this? Watching yourself and knowing you're making a bad decision, you're like, oh, Edie, don't do that. Like,
totally.
This is good. This is bad. Don't do that again. You know, like you feel that kind of like protection for her. Like you want her to avoid the mistakes that you may have made. You know.
I mean, in writing this book, I kind of had that feeling. You know, like there's an element of this book that almost feels like in a number of books, like wish fulfillment, which is like I'm writing from like the privilege of hindsight, you know, like I'm 30 now, and I wrote the book when I was like, you know, like 28 to 29. Mm-hmm. And so there was still like a pretty big gap. Like, you know, not, this isn't, you know, an autobiography, but like there's still a pretty big gap, you know, between what I knew at that age and what I knew when I was writing. And in writing it, I felt that feeling, which is that, you know, Edie, you don't know yet, you know, and like, and the pleasure of kind of moving her along to a place where she's beginning to know. but you're right. Like that's part of the sex is being a young woman and you know, for reasons that are in general I think kind of fucked up, not being able to articulate even if it's good or not. You know, like not being able to feel that the language that your body is kind of supplying you is valid, you know? And so like there's an element of that discomfort that's there is her as a young woman still kind of trying to find that, even though I would say like she expresses a great amount of agency, especially sexually, but there's still a lot that she's learning.
Yes, yeah. I also would like to talk about just like her role in the open marriage. That was another thing that like I feel like I've watched a lot of like Big Love, a lot of scenes and scenarios where it's in film, open marriages are depicted, but I haven't read that often. So it was refreshing, like, oh, like this is what it could be in real life and not Twitter, because maybe but there's this kind of a really valid picture of like both acceptance and also like being alienated at the same time from, you know, like Eric and his wife Rebecca and there's just a lot going on. Then the daughter, there's like all these things going on. And my question for you is like, where did you start? Because it felt like this really complex triangle. So who did you start with? The wife, Eric, the daughter, and how did you land there?
I started with Eric, you know, because I knew in the very beginning I wanted to write a young Black woman who is like overtly expressing her desire, and but kind of really soon, like really soon after that, I realized that the like he would kind of move out of frame a little bit, and that the primary relationships would be the ones between women.
Yes.
And I will say, balancing it, like it was murder. Like I kind of like I got into the middle of it. I was like, how do I? Oh my god! Like they're all in play. How do I? You know. But it was honestly, it started with Eric, and then as I moved along, because I'm a writer where I don't know the ending when I start. You know, I have to write a lot of it to find out if it even works.
Right.
But once I had them in the house, I knew that I wanted to write more about the kind of, I don't know, the strangeness, the derangement, the beauty and romance, the rage and savagery, and like female friendship and female relationships, I should say. But as far as open marriage was concerned, you know, like you said Big Love, right? Yeah, like that's also a reference point for me. You know, I feel like I grew up watching that on HBO. But you know, I wanted to complicate it and kind of write this arrangement as one in which all parties have invited this, which then the question then becomes why, and the question I think becomes more human and less more like two women fighting over a man or a married couple kind of breaking down, which, you know, maybe that is happening, but you know, like I think it's more vulnerable and maybe more true to depict people sort of in the midst of seeking, you know, amendment. And in a way that Eric and Rebecca are doing that. You know, Edie.
Because in the end, they feel almost, Edie and Rebecca feel closer. So it's, you know, so how, like, what was this thing about binding these two women together outside of a man? You know, like why was that so vital for you?
I mean, I'm way more interested in relationships between women, but I also really wanted to write away from the convention, which I don't think is super interesting and which kind of underestimates the complexity of women, which is that they just be these kind of rivals in love, you know, as opposed to two.
Which is less interesting.
It is fully less interesting, and I wanted to them to be more fully rendered in a way where they are allowed their own seriousness, their own fallibility, and they have to relate to each other in a way that is realistic from both of their lived experiences.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we're going to take a question, and if this is a question I was going to wait towards the end, but you know what? Let's live a little. Because everyone wants to know, if you were to cast the movie, you know, who would play who? Who would be Edie? Who would be Rebecca? Who would be Eric? Do you have any of those ideas in your head? We are in LA, so.
You know, I really, really, God, I really, really love Tika Sumpter. I love Yara Shahidi. I love Tessa Thompson. I love Sarah Snook.
I don't think I know her. Sarah who?
Sarah Snook. She's on Succession. I think she's amazing.
Yes. She plays the redhead. Is she the redhead?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, she's so great. Oh, she'd be a great Rebecca.
Yeah, I think so too. I love Catherine Hahn. I think is like incredible. Someone commented on the Instagram post the other day, and I saw it, and I was like, that is actually a great idea. Someone suggested Patrick Wilson as an Eric.
Ooh,
I love that. I really dig that. I also just really like Rob Delaney. I think would kind of be a good Eric type.
He's a little bit like what was Rob Delaney's show? He was so
Catastrophe. Also got like kind of the marriage element that I love and gravitate toward.
Rob Delaney would be good. Yeah, these are great. This is great.
Yeah, and Akila, Marseille, I think it's her.
Oh.
Marseille. I can't remember her last name, but I think she's brilliant. So like, I mean, I have to, honestly, I write and I have no faces in my head. You might notice that there's like no description, but now it's kind of fun to cast.
Coming together. You got, okay, LA people, you're casting. I'm sure we have some producers on the line, and Raven. All right, so we can make this movie happen, and I can cringe as I watch it streaming, or if the theaters are back up in the theater. I don't know. Okay, there's so much I want to ask you. I also want to put this out there because I know you've been doing so many talks with a lot of people. But if there's like a question you wish people would ask you, or like if there's something that you want to, you can save that towards the end if you like. But if there's something that you like, oh, I actually would love to like talk about this, and that hasn't been brought up yet, let us know.
Okay, I will.
What else? Okay, so I want to go back to this idea of being an artist and a writer and identity, right? Mm-hmm. So Edie's identity is so central with her painting and also her sexuality. But if there was something to be stripped from that, if her artistry wasn't such a vital point of the story, do you think Lester would have been the same? Because I was like trying to think that like if she had a different career, if she had been like worked in finance, or like what I had been like, because I'm thinking, oh, she's this creative avant-garde, she's like taking on the world. It's almost this kind of like, that is her aura. She's allowed to make those mistakes. I don't know if I would have been as forgiving if she was like a teacher or a lawyer. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know what you mean. I think, actually, I absolutely think the book would be different. Though if she were like working in finance, it would just be a novel that took place in the professional sphere. Like the publishing part would be the whole thing. And right. You would still kind of be watching the kind of complex trajectory of a Black woman trying to climb. And I think no matter where that, a Black woman is, or Black character is, that is a very kind of complex journey. But I do think that the fact that she wants to be a painter is central to this book, especially because it was one of the ways I could get at the fact of her distortion, right? Like she's struggling throughout the entire book to like paint herself, to do her self-portrait. And part of that is, she is kind of fighting a war on many fronts. And she's, at least in the first part of the book, creating from a place of exhaustion, which is a real thing I wanted to speak to. But there is also the fact that much of her bandwidth and much of her time is spent in this performance, and performance in a way, like I want to be careful how I talk about it, because it is, it's unfortunate, like it leaves no room for, a person to be fully human, but it also is a means of survival. It's a real practical thing that she's involved in, but it makes it less possible for her to see herself.
Yeah.
And since she's an artist who's trying to generate, something from her reality and trying to feel witnessed, like that has great bearing, I think, on the shape of the book.
Yeah, I agree. Because I at one moment I was just like, what if Edie was a nurse? Like how would all these situations turn out? I'm gonna go back to the question board because I think this is a great question. Because we're talking about character development and like the different roles everyone plays. But there is a question about New York being such a character in your book, which it is. There's like so many moments where now that I live in LA, like I felt like I was like revisiting New York or there because you describe the city so well. While you were writing your drafts, did you ever think of setting it somewhere else? But it could, again, similar type of question. Could this book exist in Maine or even LA? Would it be like the same kind of vibe?
Right. I definitely don't. Like, I feel like I knew for sure. And like, it's funny because like half the book is in Jersey. And for that, I had to do a little more research. I definitely, like, there's just me as a writer. Like, I really wanted to write a like a little love letter. In a way, it's like a love letter. It's a hate letter, to the city I love. But I do, I think the setting has great bearing on how the story feels. Like, I think about like Breaking Bad is a good example. Like, you can't, like, if it weren't set in like Albuquerque, I think, or maybe it's like New Mexico. Sorry, like it would just feel totally different. And I think New York, which is much, much kind of lauded and loved, and a much page space has been given over to it. So I kind of feel like I've worked in a big tradition of writers who are clearly kind of in love with the city. But there's an element to the book that has a frenzy and has a kind of a grime and a density that I think is very, at least New York as a setting feeds that in a way that at least felt true to my experience as a person who came back here. I mean, I'm from here, but I left for a moment, but I came back here to do this, to try and write full time. And it is just like, one thing after the other. And it's just, I kind of wanted to get that on the page, that frenzy, which I think is, not, there are other cities that have it, but here it has a very kind of specific.
New York is special. It's different. It's different, and it has an urgency, and you have to keep up in a way that is affirming and life building. Like I'm originally from DC, and I feel like so much of my like young adult years were really formed once I entered the city and made my life there. It just accelerated in a way that I don't think could have ever happened when I lived in the district or even here now that I'm in LA. New York is its own special ethos that it's amazing. And it's awesome that you're like a native and you like hold that as part of you, like
always. And like, I do think really like there is, and there's much to be said about New York, like there are a lot of things about the city, but one thing I really love is that people come here, with a mission. And I really, and Edie has a mission, and I think you could say the same thing about LA, for sure, but there is really an energy of a place where people come kind of wanting to fulfill a dream, and kind of dog it in the pursuit of that.
I want to ask you about, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but this idea of fighting off perfectionism, being your most like authentic self, but also struggling. So we see Edie struggling in all these different ways, but we also see her humor and her like how like she's that's another thing that I don't feel like enough of the reviews talk about. Like it's really funny. It's like a really funny book. How were you able to write these scenes of like really dry I guess it's like, were you trying to do satire? I guess not. Like,
no.
how would you describe the humor? Because I'm not doing a great job. But
So no,
I
mean, to be honest, it wasn't until like, we started kind of the book launched, and I had to try and articulate how that happened, where I was like, I don't actually know. I've been learning as I go, because I will say, when I started writing this book, I did not intend, I feel like this is the only funny thing I've ever written. Really, truly, it just kind of came about, and I have to give credit to Britt Bennett, because she actually made an observation during our talk, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what's happening there. So I think at least one of the ways, humor in a comedy is kind of manifest on the page is that, with my mission to kind of depict the consciousness of a Black woman, and to be candid in not, the joy is important to me, but also the brutality of existing at that intersection, that there is a almost unnecessary, stoicism in the face of that, even though we can feel her feeling and, her wanting, but her resignation is the dryness that you're talking about.
Yeah.
The sort of irony of the kind of hyperbole of her environment and her response to it, in a way
she's so acutely aware of everything.
Right.
She walks on the subway and it's like, it smells like old pickles. And it's like, that's a real smell in Williamsburg, But
I think too, there is the comedy too is in her rage, right? In what is suppressed, what is suppressed because, she needs to survive, which is, the friction between the performance, the kind of outward performance that we see, and the kind of inward kind of commentary and dialogue, which we're privy to. And seeing the kind of friction between those two things, I think, between her rage and then her kind of her thank you,
Right. But it balances it out. So you kind of, again, you have this look into her interior life, but you also know what she's taking in around her. And
right.
It's but it's so good. It's so funny. And I was just like, this is hilarious. This there are so many great, your sentence structure is just so good. I read somewhere that Zadie Smith was one of your, and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't know if this is right, was one of your advisors?
Yeah. So in the program, when you're about to kind of graduate, you have your thesis, and in this case, Luster was my thesis. Nice. They give you an advisor who will kind of look over your project as you're writing it, and Zadie was my advisor.
That's it, because some of the scenes, have you read NW?
Oh, yes.
This gave me NW vibes.
Oh, that's incredible. I mean, any comparison.
There's definitely some scenes where I'm just like, did she just do that? Yeah, so I was like, oh, so when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That she was your advisor, if there was any, so she gave the final look through at the end, or
I mean, yes, I actually, she was, I kind of, as I was writing it, she was my advisor, so I'd kind of send her chapters as I was going along. Nice. And the best email to send is I'm finally done, but she really was really generous and really wonderful. And I think the writing, writing any book, any project, toward the end of it, I started to feel what I honestly don't feel through most of a project, which is kind of anxiety. So I started to feel, the kind of vulnerability of being on the cusp of trying to put something out into the world. And Zadie really, really kind of pushed me to be brave in a way that I think I really needed.
That's amazing. So I'm going to use the last 10 minutes to really focus, because we have 3 great questions. One from Tamika. Hey, girl. So we're going to start with Brittany's question. Edie gives off this sense of loneliness and longing throughout the book. Was it intentional to make her story so singular, i.e. not having friends or family in a way that we see? That's a fair question.
Yes. It's funny you mentioned that, because I think when I started workshopping this, one of the comments I got was she has no friends. Who are her friends? And no, she is a solitary character. I think much of the conflict comes from her trying to solve that absence And, I kind of wanted to give more background and more context around like her kind of family. So you understand why her responses to her loneliness are what they are. But it felt, I will say, there's an element of like not having extra characters where I, as a writer, have like less work to do. But I did want to kind of tackle what that looks like, that kind of rootlessness, which I think, her loneliness, the lack of kind of other people in her life is a symptom also of the fact that she's a character where much of her bandwidth is spent trying to live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what? I made up this story in my mind. Did you ever, there was like a woman in the 80s, I think, that like, it was like in the UK, she passed away, no one noticed. I think there was like a documentary back in the day about it. Like, so like but she had been really vibrant in her youth and like had traveled to meet Nelson Mandela and all these things. And suddenly like, she got older and like passed away and didn't have any connections with people.
Yeah. Wow.
But like her Edie being alone like that, like I feel like that is like a very possible thing, especially like now, like when we're so digitally connected with things, but people are still struggling with loneliness. I think I didn't that didn't bother me as much because I'm like, actually, there's so many people that lived in that existence of being alone and not real and trying to manifest connections, but whether it's anxiety or whatever the case may be, are unable to. So I felt that it felt very possible.
Yeah, and I also should like. I'm also a severe introvert, so like, perhaps I have some bias toward solitary characters.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do that because I don't want to run out of time. So the next question is really awesome. It's about Black women narratives, this is really important as a Black writer. How can we talk a bit more about what it means to write a Black woman's narrative and the importance of varying stories and existences? Because Edie is completely not the typical, I'll put that in air quotes, if you will. She is like not adhering to any kind of respectability politics. Like how did you? Well, let me just focus. Let me focus on Tamika. This good question. The importance of varying stories and existences. Can you speak a little bit to that?
So, more than anything, I really just, I wanted to afford a Black woman on the page the right to be fallible. I think like this is like the kind of, I have my stump speech a little bit about, the expectation that we put on Black women to be strong and to be stoic in the face of suffering. And I really wanted to write against that, because I think that expectation is one that prioritizes our silence and our stoicism as opposed to our humanity. I think to show, to also make room, because it's important for me to write about Blackness in a way that makes room for joy, that is not simply defined by trauma. And I want to say like trauma is like a very heavy word. I don't want to put value judgments on the kinds of stories that are kind of making plain that trauma, because I think often people who've gone through traumatic experiences, their power is in the telling. So I think those stories are important. But I wanted to make room for joy, for a Black woman. And this, this book is kind of heavy, but there's disco, there's real, there are moments where you get to see her assert herself sexually, and articulate what she wants. But there are also moments where she fucks up, and like that was deeply important to me, to write a Black woman who, is really just trying to, trying to find intimacy, affirm her artistry, and doing it and kind of making mistakes, as we all do. So I will say, I hope that answered the question, but for me, it was more, I just wanted to depict like a fallible human character who is trying to solve those, kind of existential questions, which is, how do I find meaning in this? You know, how do I find someone to witness me? And on the way there, you know, we make mistakes.
So this is another question, but I want to tie it to this one. So in that regard, why did you decide to include the police scene?
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to speak in that part that's happening in Jersey. And I wanted, you know, when she arrives and Akila confirms this, you know, she's aware immediately that she's being surveilled. And, you know, there's an element of kind of, I know that there's much is made around the kind of black body and saying the term black body, but, you know, to inhabit a black body is to be aware, hyper aware of of the way you're being surveilled. And, you know, there are elements of that feel surreal, where I have written a character, a black woman who enters people's houses and, you know, like stands outside, you know, old lovers' house, you know, really truly a real like black creep, you know, like more, what are they saying? I feel like more dirtbag black girls. I really dig that. You know,
I like that.
but I will say, you know, more to the question, that I did still want to be candid and honest about the reality of inhabiting a black body. And in this case, she's in an environment in the suburbs, which in a different context with a different character is a place of boredom and malaise. But for her, is a place of kind of like a different, her body is imperiled in a different way. And that did feel, you know, relevant to kind of depict. But yeah, I will say that I really thought a while about what it would mean to include a scene like that. But in this case, I wanted to speak about how that surveillance can, you know, quickly manifest as violence.
Yeah. I think, you know, as you said, we're using the word trauma, and
Right.
I saw recently, there's a new book that's out, and in the beginning they offer like a trigger warning, like this book includes scenes of sexual violence, rape, assault, and do you feel like if there's some, you could go back, would you offer like a trigger warning to people?
Yeah, I would, because I believe in that. Like, I really do believe in that. I mean, even for, you know, some of the more kind of like violent sexual, you know, moments in the book, I do. I think that, you know, I do believe that in kind of being generous with your audience and with your readers, and being sensitive to the fact that your readers are bringing different experiences, you know, their own experiences to your work.
What would you say to those who feel uncomfortable with those scenes or find it not accurate portrayal of again, all quote marks, because what does that even mean? But because I'm really curious to see because we're having another discussion on Saturday that's dedicated like to Black women, and to see what made people feel affirmed, what made people feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
And because there's so much, it's like, but what I really want to unpack the discomfort, like what is it exactly about seeing that violence or seeing her paired in this relationship or with this man that makes it feel so threatening, you know? Like I think that's something, it makes you feel like, oh, it's like, you know, this idea of airing the dirty laundry, like she shouldn't behave that way, you know?
I mean, that is a real thing too. And it's funny you said airing the dirty laundry, because as I was writing this draft, I feel like I had a conversation, I don't know with who, about what that means, especially if you're writing, you know, you're in a marginalized community and you have been afforded the very rare space to tell your story.
Right.
There is like a pressure to make the story one that is pristine, one that like lifts up, you know, and
one where she doesn't get punched in the face.
Right. You know, but I will say that, you know, it also lifts up a community when you allow its members to, I don't know, to be human in all their contradictions.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Not have to be kind of beholden to an expectation for a pristine story. But no, I do think it has been really kind of wonderful hearing from readers and seeing the responses, and many of those like kind of queries about the discomfort are valid.
Right. I know we're close on time, but there's a great question just about your writing experience, and it's from Nina. She wants to know, do you have any advice for aspiring writers who don't know where to start? So you have come a long way from your MFA and now this wonderful, amazing book. But tell us about little baby Raven when you were first writing and how you picked up the pen.
That's wonderful. And I hope that I can, I honestly, I think that the best thing that you can do is to make it a practice and to do it regularly. Like I was actually talking recently, and then this comes up a lot, I think specifically because of the book being about an artist trajectory, but the idea of when can you say that you are this? When can you say that you're a painter or a writer? And I think you can say it when you're doing the work, even if the work is private. And I had to kind of remind myself of that frequently in my, kind of writing journey. I started writing really seriously, and when I say seriously, it was like with the intent to be published. Around 23. I had been writing like a bunch of stuff before that, like fan fiction, but I started really writing, really trying to get like some stuff together, and it was years until I actually got like the first publishing credit. Like I sent out my drafts and my I was writing short stories mostly to literary journals and magazines, and first year, like nothing but rejections. Like I started a Excel spreadsheet for my rejections, and then I just kept going, and like each kind of, for me, I think that there are so many different paths. For me, I went the the MFA route and also the literary journal route, where I wrote short stories. I submitted to journals, and through the traditional way, through a submission manager that you'll hear after 6 months maybe. And every now and then something would stick. I get an acceptance, and then that would be the thing that would keep me going. Like, okay, I'm doing something right. And if, in fact, the story was rejected like 5 times, I would take it back and think, okay, how can I retool this? Yeah. And so I will say, like, it was a combination of honestly the private work, every now and then a little bit of external validation that I was doing something right. And then for me, and that's a personal thing. I think that you don't necessarily need to do this, but going to the MFA helped more because I was in a community of writers, and that seriousness, being in a community where everyone cared and everyone was vulnerable in that way, that was really good for me. So I think there are a number of ways to kind of go, really, truly a number of ways to go about it. But the key for me, I think, is to be consistent in your craft, make room for, especially right now, make room to just, be human and get rest when you need it. But practice it, practice your craft. Even if it's just something that you see, it's all progress.
That is great advice and a perfect way to close. It is all progress. Thank you, Raven.
Thank you.
This is my first time doing Crowdcast, so I'm not sure if like BookSoup's gonna pop back up or if oh, okay, that's happening. Okay.
I don't have to, but don't want to put all the pressure on you. So thank you so much. That was an amazing talk, and yes, wonderful advice, just to mirror that end right there. And thank you both so much for being with us. Raven, congratulations. This is an amazing, amazing feat. So I love hearing about all of your experiences. And Glory, again, thank you for being with us again, and looking forward to having Well Read Black Girl back when we can be in stores again.
Yeah.
And please support independent bookstores and new young authors. Purchase Luster at the bottom of the screen at the green button. And thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you. It's such a great crowd, and time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Raven. You're amazing. Thank you, Samantha.
You're amazing.
Thank you, BookSoup. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.